to Parallel Barking. I am here with my co-host,
Larry Backer, woof woof.
and of course, I'm Ariana Backer, Bark Bark.
Thank you,
Today,
puppy.
today we're talking about
Vacations. It is summertime.
well, yeah, we're talking about the ocean.
So what better to talk about than the oceans and vacations in summertime?
And a bit of drama, actually a lot of drama.
A lot of drama.
If you woke up and read any news this morning, June 19th, actually, happy Juneteenth for those that celebrate. You should all celebrate. It is, yeah, I'm being really.
Just go on. What's the story?
It is the Titanic rescue race.
Or put a different way, the Titanic is claiming yet more drama.
lives. Yeah. Or no. Let's
maybe.
not say that.
Right.
That's a little too.
Yeah, do the reportage.
A tourist submersible was taking wealthy, well, we are assuming wealthy explorers to the Titanic wreckage site.
Which is 12,000 feet, I guess, beneath the surface of the ocean.
12,500. Yeah.
Right.
About 2.5 miles underwater. And it's about 370 miles from the coast of Newfoundland, Canada.
Right.
What has happened is the 5 people on board have gone missing, including a British billionaire, Hamish Harding, and a Dubai explorer. He's a Dubai explorer and is the CEO of Action Aviation and the Middle Eastern nation of Dubai.
Right.
So
they've got 96 hours to find them and bring them up.
Well,
as of the reporting first thing on Monday morning.
Actually, as of 1 p.m. today, there are only 72 hours of oxygen left.
And so we bring you this story.
And it is quite interesting.
Would you do this?
Would I do it?
Yes.
For $250,000? I don't know. People are going up in space. I want to know how much that is.
Oh, so you would do it as a function of price if you got some kind of coupon for poor people? You would do it?
I'm not that interested in seeing the Titanic wreckage myself. I would
be just
as interested in seeing it on a recording of some sort.
All right. Do you think it's crazy for them to want to do this? The hesitation means you're dying to say yes, but you're trying to figure out how you can plausibly say no, but sound not crazy, or not sound kind of narrow-minded.
I guess if you are of a certain mind, if you have a certain thrill-seeking nature and you have expendable income and you feel some need, I guess this is a way you can fill that need.
Oh my God, are we being judgmental or are we being judgmental? But this brings us right to the absolute core point of the place where we are as a global society today. Because your comment, I'm going to go the other way. Your comment and your suppressed, although very genteel, judgment actually hits the nail on the head in this way. The question is, to what extent ought individuals to be protected against themselves, or to what extent should individuals be allowed to, and here's the word of the decade, allowed to take risks. Everything we talk about now in the way in which we order social relations, whether it's economic relations, political relations, or interpersonal relations, is all grounded in the notions of risk. And using that concept of risk, this is risk tourism, with respect to which, by the way, there is this exploding literature. I pulled up a couple of articles. There's a very, very rich literature on this, with respect to which the question is, should the state, your mom, your uncle Tyrone, the community, your church group, should they not just put moral pressure on you or social pressure, but should the state actually interdict or suppress certain risk-taking activities, the way we are now beginning to suppress all kinds of risk activities
I mean,
in a
you
variety
jumped
of other
all the
areas.
way over there. You really did. I mean,
Yeah. Well, but that's what we're talking about. So in this case, you've got a lot of people with a huge amount of disposable income, sufficient to
but
take this kind of very elaborate risk. It could be as risky but cheap as bungee jumping. And we have all kinds of stories about people going bungee jumping and then something goes wrong with the bungee. And then the next thing you know, they're not here with us anymore.
but
Right.
yeah,
But it's
but now we have
risk
the Coast
taking.
Guard involved. You're right. You're right. Because
Right.
of this giant ass risk that they took, now we have to get the
Who's we?
Boston, well,
Who's we? The state.
the
That's why the
state.
state is.
You're
That's
right.
why the state is pissed, because and this is like the
And it
third
costs
thing,
a lot
right?
of money. It costs a
Right.
lot of money to get the
Right.
Boston Coast Guard,
Hey, but you spent
Canadian.
$275,000 to take this risk. Perhaps the Coast Guard will send you a bill for the time and trouble it took to. But this happens all the time. I mean,
Will they though? Or will they send it to
no one, or will they send it to, if
tax?
it's the
Was it
U.S.
will
Coast Guard, it'll
taxes
be us.
increase? I know,
Right.
I know, I know that's not a popular
Yeah.
topic.
Well, no, but it's this isn't an American thing. I was hiking in Hong Kong and up a little mountainette, and I was being told stories about people who collapsed halfway up, and then the Hong Kong authorities would have to send a helicopter in. It's very rough terrain to rescue them. And then, of course, in my head is exactly this. Well, we've got a convergence of risk and human autonomy, risk taking, in this case for pleasure activities or tourism, right? To what extent ought the state to intervene in the risk-taking decision, or to facilitate it, right? In this case, in the case of these trails, by making it easier to climb up these things. And then the second part, which is the part that's actually frosted your whatever it is that you like frosted,
I like
is
cookies.
assuming you take this risk, who ought to what extent must the state, in order to minimize the risk that you have undertaken, to what extent must the state now develop procedures and facilities for rescuing you? And then the last question is, to what extent or who ought to bear the cost of that? Should society bear the cost of the rescue, on the theory that human self-actualization sometimes required risk-taking, especially in a monotonous, bureaucratized society where everyone is told what to do, and that this is all cool and we'll subsidize it? Or should there be no rescue and you're on your own? You're going to have to facilitate your own rescue at your expense. You're going to have the helicopters waiting and the ships before you go underneath the water. Or should you get a bill? Now, in this case, divided 5 ways, and then they can duke it out over.
Well, why are you putting it only on the individuals? Why not the company that supplies?
Bingo. Thank you. Brilliant. Right. Or, right, the company maybe ought to be required to insure itself, or to, because who knows how much this is going to cost. You're going to want them to upfront it some way. And the traditional way of upfronting risk mitigation is to buy insurance, especially if you're an economic enterprise. You can do that.
Well, I'm wondering what insurance company would insure this kind of.
Well, depending on how much money they're willing, it depends on I mean, there's a market for everything. There's a market for everything. And if you're charging $200,000 or $300,000 a pop to go see the Titanic, Right. This is a spectacular case, which is why, and a very tragic one, hopefully it isn't tragic, but it's spectacular and therefore a useful one to talk about, as opposed to some person who saved up for 6 months to go bungee jumping off of something. Then no one is interested. But this becomes interesting the same if the story would have been about being stranded up in space, and therefore we can, it nicely distills the issues. Right, so you can do that. What do you think? In this case, and so, like I said, I've been reading the literature. The question really is, there are a number of questions. The first one is goes on the issue of self-actualization. That is, some of the literature talks about, it's sort of like the modern version of false consciousness. Are people taking risks because they believe that they're self-actualizing, that this is giving them pleasure, but they're deluding themselves? I always thought this article was bizarrely circular, but it gives academics pleasure, and there's a big business in this kind of circularity in self-actualization studies. And so the question is, do you think you're having fun, but are you really having fun because you're being risky, you're making everyone else crazy, so therefore you can't be having fun? Or are you really
having fun if you're making other people crazy? That could be the fun.
This sounds like my mom. You can't be having fun if you're making me crazy, because I'm going to make your life a living hell after you get back, because you made me crazy while you were having fun taking risk-bearing activities. In this case, substitute society or the state for my mom, and you have the nature of the argument. She rests in peace. And she was right. I shouldn't have been so crazy risk-taking, but at the time it was a lot of pleasure, at least short-term. And do we really understand the way we are pleasuring ourselves? Or maybe what it suggests is that the state has to do a better job of, and I'm using this in heavy quotations, educating us into what is pleasure and how we can identify it, and the appropriate risk for pleasuring ourselves.
No. I don't need to be told what makes me feel good or what I have fun with. I don't need to be told that.
That's a slippery slope. The next thing you know, you're going to come, and someone is going to come to us and say, well, fentanyl is a lot of fun, and I get a lot of pleasure out of however it is one ingests fentanyl, and I know it's risky because I'll die, but I don't care. Okay. Oh, in the meantime, you're going to have to rescue me and try to save my body, if not my mind, and blah blah blah. And now this is a variation, right? We're talking vanilla, even though it's expensive in this case, but it could go dark really fast. But around all of this is, of course, the notion of risk, the notion of reward, and the notion of who pays, right? Who bears the risk and who bears the reward, who captures the reward for these kind of risky activities. Merely because it's tourism, right, it doesn't mean it's less valuable, I suppose, than, I don't know, building or engaging in some economic activity.
But bearing the risk, whoever owns the risk, deciding who owns the risk is different from prevention, preventing.
Bearing and owning can be split up too. Right?
Case,
right.
Absolutely. So in this case, but that's completely different from preventing or stopping someone from doing an act completely.
Right. But then we get into the dicey issue. So the state can say, look, you are the risk agent. Can I say that, even though I'm the state or the company or the insurance company, can I say up front, before you go down in the submarine, hey, baby, you are incurring the risk, you're the risk agent, but you're also going to bear the risk. So if something goes wrong, we're going to watch you with our hands crossed, our arms crossed, and it's up to you. And if you didn't prepare for your rescue, then there's not a thing we're going to do, and that's the end. The problem is, from a theoretical perspective, I think that's perfectly plausible. From the perspective of the way in which we judge human relations and human responsibilities, I think as a practical or as a moral, ethical matter, that's impossible. Could you imagine the state saying, oh man, these rich people went down in the sub is now in danger, not my problem, good luck, and let us know how it turns out. There would be a scandal.
Right, but there are things that you can do to mitigate that sort of.
Who's the you here?
Well, I suppose the state. If you're
But you
talking,
mentioned why the state. You yourself said that, and I thought quite correctly, it doesn't have to be the state. The state is the risk bearer.
It could be the state,
choice.
or it could be the company. It could be the people. It could be any sort of. It could be any sort of rule or a guideline that you decide to put out.
But who decides to put it out? Would it be the company that would be required to put out these rules so that all the state does is say, look, you can't run this business unless you have a set of rules? Is the state saying you can't do this thing unless you have a set of rules?
Sure.
And approve the rules? Or is the state saying, man, I guess I'm the one who's going to have to do it? And at the end of the day,
I don't think it has to be one way or the other. I think you're being very black and white when it doesn't have to be black and white.
I'm about to sing about.
Please do. Break out.
No. But yeah, no, and I'm deliberately being black and white to provoke you into saying what you're about to say.
And what was that? What is that? Oh, wise one.
No, far be it from me to put words in your mouth. It's a bad habit I'm trying to break.
Uh-huh.
No, and your point is well taken that it doesn't have to be black and white, and indeed there can be a somewhat complicated blending.
Yes, there should be a blending of public and private solutions. And I think there should be a cooperation between the two.
And maybe we got it here so that when at the end of the day the people don't have the cash to pay, and the company said, oh yeah, I got the ship, but I ain't got the insurance, and at the end of the day it's the Coast Guard that has to go off and rescue them, and God willing they will, then the state is left holding the bag. And at that point the question is, if they are the ultimate risk bearers, does bearing the risk then entitle them to tell you that you can't take the risk?
Well,
because they're not willing to front the cash or the resources, or
that's up to
put
them.
Their own people in jeopardy.
That is up to them. That is up to them, because they have that right. Because if they are the only ones that have the ability to, or have the manpower or have the tools to rescue you, if you decide to put yourself in that situation, and there is only so much that can be done to save you, then that is that entity's right to say, hey, we can't do it.
Well, okay, great. That all works well in a world in which everyone obeys rules. And you know specifically, since you were a toddler, what's the one thing that you had an extraordinary propensity not to do? Obey the rules. And you were willing to risk the consequences. If we could do a podcast, actually it'd be a series of podcasts listing all of the times in which you made that another risk calculus, right? But and here you're in the case of this submersible, you're risking your life. In your case, you were risking your ability to leave your room for weeks at a time in punishment. It's somewhat different, but the mechanics are similar. So what happens if, in fact, the state, we get to this point and the state says, okay, great, I'm suppressing this. And then we've got all of these people with a whole lot of money and access to all this technology, and they go, ha, no problem, we're going to do it anyway. And then we're back to this. is the state going to be able at that point to say, ah, ha, 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 we told you can't do it. And in fact, we created rules that says you can't do it and you shouldn't do it. Now you've gone ahead and done it anyway. You're actually violating whatever rule. Now I can kick back and watch.
So you're saying that nobody is going to allow the state to just sit back and watch?
Well, I mean, the state can decide to kick back and watch, and the political consequences are of a significance which is unknown but not likely positive.
So what would most likely happen is probably the state would intervene, and whoever gets rescued would be admonished.
Well, or jailed or fined.
Exactly, punished.
And that may be the way,
way.
yeah, and that may be the way it goes. And you can, and that may be the other way of doing it. So when you're doing risk like this, and you've got in a sense, an involuntary risk bearer, then, and the risk bearer is the state that has a lot of power, or an enterprise. One of the ways of not mitigating the risk, but aligning risk taking and risk bearing would be through either the police power on the part of the state or civil fines, either in the form of penalties by a business but it still doesn't get us. Underlying all of this is the real question, which is, or have we decided that indeed, in the way in which we now run the world, that people ought to a significant extent be able both to engage, to undertake risky activities and to be protected from the consequences to the extent we can, to mitigate the consequences of risk bearing, and that it doesn't matter whether in fact you're taking a risk because you're engaging in highly dangerous productive, quote unquote, productive activity like in a factory, or whether it is because you are jumping off a helicopter in absolutely virgin snowpack way up where there's no one around, and then you're going to ski down the hill, or you're going to get in a submersible and go see the Titanic, or try to, I don't know, visit the moon or whatever it is they're doing.
I mean, my thought is people are going to do it. So yes, people, we're not going to be able to stop it. The only way we're going to be able to get it to the point that we find acceptable is to realize that people are just going to want to do what they want to do. There's a market for this. There are businesses, just like we have seen. What is this? The OceanGate is the business that,
right, and they've been around for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least a little while, or a while.
OceanGate is the sub that is missing.
Yeah, right.
And there are businesses that are based on, bungee jumping on.
Right. And as soon as something horrible happens, they're going to declare bankruptcy. But in that context, they can still be adjudicated either for criminal negligence. They can be sued to the extent that they're not judgment proof. And ultimately, the state is going to have to come in through their rescue duties. And I can think of, and that will work certainly in developed states. But what about in developing states where you have that same sense, but they have absolutely no capacity?
That is one thing I was thinking. I was like, this is a very
first world problem.
Yeah, this is very luxurious problem to be thinking about. And
yeah, either in the work world, that is through traditional economic activities, or in the context in which we're talking about it, which is the quote unquote markets for leisure and leisure activities, both of which are productive activities. But since we still pretend we live in the 19th century, we distinguish them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what happens if you're in country X? I'm not going to name a country because I have no idea what capacities are. But let's say we're in country X, where indeed they don't have this capacity. They've got very few officials who are available because their budgets are strained and it's all they can do to deliver basic services, much less to babysit people doing extraordinarily risky things. Same rule? It's just that, is it just that the nature of the risk has changed?
Yes. Yes. The nature of the risk has gone up tremendously. I mean,
Okay.
if I were the kind of person that liked to take risks, I probably would not take a risk in a place that I didn't think had the equipment to, or the capacity to rescue me if I
Okay.
needed it.
And that brings us to what I think should be our last point. Ultimately, and this is, again, the core of markets, the core of evaluation, the core of risk, and that is information. If that's the case, right, and we've talked about mitigating risk, we've talked about hedging and all of that, but we haven't talked about information. If what you're saying is true, and I agree with you, does that mean that even in a place that has very little actual capacity to mitigate risk gone bad, ought there, or is there, or should there be some kind of uniform sense or consensus about the nature of information that should be conveyed so that people can calculate their risks?
Of
It's
course, but do you think
really
the companies that are selling that business or services are going to want to share that information?
So now we have another market, and that is the market in providing reliable information for risk taking.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of have that a little bit in the context of quote unquote traditional economic activity. We certainly have been developing it in the context of consumer choices, right, and consumerism. But in a sense, if you're consuming a luxury or a risky leisure product, like a trip 12,500 feet down to see the Titanic, ought the sensibilities of, consumer protection and information also apply, and perhaps apply more forcefully in this context?
That would be super interesting to, get the data on. This is your likelihood of success in this endeavor.
Right.
This is your
Right. Or
likelihood.
Here are all the things that can go wrong.
This is
Here
what
are the
could go
risks,
wrong. This
right?
is
And this is what it's going to cost.
this is how many people have done it this year. This is how many
Right.
people have.
Right. And this is what we're going to have to do in order to protect you if things get
Exactly.
bad.
These are how
And
many
this is what it's
services
going to
exist
cost
that can
you.
save you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. So you can do information. And in fact, if you do this in a sophisticated enough way, you can tie that information to requirements like insurance
Exactly. If you want
and
this
blah, blah,
insurance,
blah.
you can contact this.
And all
Ooh,
of this is
wow. We
very,
just made a business.
right. And all of this is very expensive. If the state does it, it's prohibitively expensive. If the state doesn't do it, it's going to be expensive to oversee. One, to develop the rules, and then to oversee these robust markets and information. And if you're in countrywide that is very skittish about sharing any kind of information, because any information is a national security issue, then this whole thing comes tumbling down.
Yes.
We're going to have a pod in a future pod fairly soon on disclosure, issues of disclosure in the context of these emerging systems of mandatory human rights due diligence across supply chains. But the problem is the same. And so something that seems either innocuous or sort of in left field, like, oh my God, submarine tourism, actually sits at the very center of some of the most important discussions in the way in which we order our relationships, our social relationships, in the context both of self-actualization, markets, and risk mitigation that are currently in discussion.
I bet there are a bunch of things that we could do to bring those things up into the 21st century.
Oh my God, there is. But now I know, I can hear your wheels creaking. You want to do this business. So we're not going to talk about it because we don't want any of you to compete with us.
Well, I welcome the competition. I welcome it. But I would like some collaboration.
Running for office?
No, I would actually like some open competition, and I want to openly fight.
Oh my God, where's my garlic?
I want to get some aggression out here.
I need my garlic and sunlight.
I'm not a vampire.
All
All right.
right, woof woof.
Bark bark. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next time.